the Very Not Normal podcast, and I'm your host, Frieda Vizel. The last few months during the COVID restrictions have felt very much like deja vu. I've experienced the COVID restrictions very similarly to the way I experienced my Hasidic childhood and early adulthood. And I think that is because they are both very, very similar in that they have the very strong attributes of fundamentalist religions or dogma or communities. In this episode, I'm going to show you why or what makes that so. But first, a little advertisement. Before we begin, allow me just a minute to tie this episode together with my last episode, where I talked about the erosion of community in Western societies, and I discussed how screen technology, techno corporations are playing a role in the dissolution of Western communities. And I contrasted this with the Hasidic community where things are different. So you might be asking, so are you saying Hasidim are good? And I've done so many Q&As in my life that I can now anticipate the questions. And when I say something like I point out something that functions one way or the other, I'm often asked about the value judgment. So I want to say that we shouldn't be so simplistic as to look at things as in good and bad. I think community is vital. I'm extremely critical of the destruction of Western social fabric. I am extremely critical in the rejection of humanness. And I will tell you that I do enjoy seeing elements of community that are lost. I do enjoy seeing them in the streets of Hasidic Williamsburg. But having community itself is not enough. It really also needs to be good community. Community is a form of human relationship. It's like friendship, a family, a lover, a partner. We need relationships, some people more than others, but we need those relationships to be good, and they don't function or they don't fill our needs if they're repressive, abusive, or if they're discriminatory, they're exclusionary, they bully us. So having community in and of itself, while I appreciate seeing that doesn't mean that it is the whole story, because community needs to be good. And while I admire the robust street life in Williamsburg, and I think especially for children it's really wonderful that they have that community is also very repressive. And I think that works for some, not for others. But it's not a community I'd pick if I were to pick one. Not that there are communities to pick from, but I digress. My point is that Satmar Hasidism is extremely repressive as a community, and it needs to be that for its survival. And this brings me back to the subject of our podcast today, which is on repressive societies. Essentially, what's operating here is the religious approach, and it is helpful to think in this sense within the binaries of the religious approach and the scientific approach. And I hesitate to even use the term science because it has been so completely corrupted of meaning by this veneration of people in authority with white coats with the title scientist, but that following the science, a cultish, blind submission to leaders in the medical fields is actually scientism. It isn't the scientific way of seeing the world. The scientific method is a way of thinking. It is still open to being abused by the people who think with it. It is not incorruptible, but it is distinct from the religious way of thinking. In this way, scientific way of thinking says we are open to any new information, and whatever new information we receive or new questions, we will approach them, we will re-examine our assumptions, and perhaps rethink the way we see the world. On the other hand, the religious perspective is to say we have this divine understanding of the world, or we just have an understanding of the world that is already fixed. We know the world already, and any new information that challenges our world is going to have to be marginalized. I want to quote from the work of David Cayley, the Canadian scholar, who's been just a breath of fresh air and a voice of sanity during this time. And as an aside, if you're interested in the kind of cultural analysis that I'm interested in, then I very much recommend you check out his piece, The Prognosis, in Literary Review of Canada. But right now, here, I want to pull from a different piece in which he discussed the intersection of lockdowns and religion. And I want to bring in a quote. What makes a religion, as Emil Durkheim argued more than a century ago, is the designation of a sacred dimension which is not to be touched, investigated, or interfered with. End quote. So now this is important. The distinction is that here's an area you're not allowed to touch, investigate, or interfere with. What does this mean? How does this look in real life? Essentially, this is where the normal comes into play. The sacred is presented to the public as if it is the only way to live. It is the only rational way to be. And it is not to be questioned because there's no other way. This is all there is. Of course, this is how it is when you grow up in the Hasidic community. It is unfathomable that you should live any other way. And this is what Cayley articulates very well when he describes how people came to accept the lockdowns by and here I'm going to quote again from him, gradual naturalization of certain concepts. I'm paraphrasing certain concepts about risk and safety. And now back to the quote, has made the policy that has been followed so rational, so inevitable, and so entirely without alternative that it has been possible to freely vilify its opponents and largely exclude them from media, which might have made their voices politically influential. So two things are playing out here. We have a normal, and you tell people that there is no other way, that this is the natural way. And then we also have a system in which anything that challenges the normal, that explains that the normal is a human creation and questions it, is demonized. But of course, the normal is not the natural. It's not inevitable. It's not without alternatives. It's human creation, and it's full of assumptions, beliefs, worldviews, values, and instructions that are all created by man and his way of seeing things. So, in my Hasidic world, normal is the belief that God created the world in 7 days, that the Jews are the chosen people, there are a bunch of rules that we Jews have to follow, or else there will be terrible suffering that will befall not just the sinner but all, and not just in this world but in the future world, and it will prolong the exile of the Jewish people. This is the normal I grew up in. And in the lockdown Welt, the normal is very different, of course, but it's also very, very powerful. And it is that there's a new mutation of a contagion, of a malady that is spread. It is novel and it will cause millions of deaths. That this projected, prophesized crisis is the most important crisis to befall humanity, and that because it is the most important, it takes precedence over everything else in the world, and that a bunch of rules and restrictions will solve the problem and mitigate this plague. And finally, those who don't follow the rules cause suffering for all. And interestingly, not only are these two sets of dogmas similar in the sense that they purport to find purpose, priority, and to say that sinners are punishing the non-sinners, but they are also, what I find particularly interesting is the COVID rules are very similar to Hasidic rules. It's a fear of the human. It's a fear of letting yourself experience the world. It's fear of intimacy. I grew up with a lot of rules around hugs. Of course, I wasn't allowed to hug men. Now I'm not allowed to hug anyone. I wasn't allowed to shake hands with men. Now handshakes are people pull away their hands, which is very deja vu. We were supposed to have curtain dividers between men and women. Now the curtain dividers are everywhere in restaurants. We were supposed to put on certain fabrics, as I had heard of them, were to help keep out negative forces, the tima, the impurity. And of course now we have that with the clothing as well. There is the entire system of creating all of these rules, 6 feet apart and 6 people in the store, and washing your hands. Of course, hand washing was a very, very big part in my Orthodox childhood. You wash your hands every time after you go to the bathroom and before you eat food. And there's merit to some of this. But again, all of these rules are the result, they're the outcome of a normal that is not normal, and a normal that, meaning it is not natural. It is not the only way to be. It is not the only priorities humans can have. And all of these rules are presented to you as the only possible way things can be, or else. What's or else? What are you being threatened by this mafia-esque kind of insinuation? What happens if you don't conform? I know most people seem to think that if you don't conform, like in the terrible show Unorthodox, then your husband and your ex-husband and his friend come running after you, and there's some kind of physical system of forcing you to conform. But actually, of course, conformity is first and foremost and most powerfully extracted by punishing people socially. So those who don't comply pay a price, and those who comply are rewarded. And when you see that those who don't comply are punished, then that becomes a very strong lesson to everyone else. And in the Hasidic community, this operates on steroids, especially in the female spheres. So everyone says, so-and-so is so not normal. What's going on with her? Oh, poor thing. She's not normal. And, there's this feigning of empathy that is really barely disguising the Schadenfreude, that is the vilifying, and not only that, the making yourself feel better about repression by jumping on the bandwagon. I'm not... Unfortunately, I can't say I haven't jumped on the bandwagon, and I am not free of sin in terms of vilifying, because We are all social creatures, but it's very powerful, because when you are vilifying and when you are hearing your friends vilify and you are repeating to yourself, this is who I should never be. This is what I should never ever become, in the mouth of people, lose my respect. So people not only are being censored, but also they are self-censoring. I remember as a kid, I don't know why I remember this story, but there was this woman, I didn't know her personally, but someone we were sitting girls outside on the grass and we were chatting, and someone said, did you hear, let's say Claude had this Claude, she's so funny, something is not normal with her, she had fun, colorful feet fingers. In my mind it was like a clown's toes, but years later I realized that it was really that she had a pedicure. But it made an impression on me so strongly, because I thought, wow, that's so awful. You know, it was the force with which we all reacted to it that made me associate colorful feet fingers so strongly with it being bad, without me ever analyzing why actually. Why is it bad? What's the big deal? Let her have colorful feet fingers. What's so bad about that? But these things have very, very strong powers to marginalize and destroy the lives of those who have the colorful feet fingers. And not only is there the mocking and the false pity, but there's also the moral judgment. You call them selfish all the time. And the public hyper empathizes with a supposed victim of the rebel, and in the meantime they completely deny that the rebel will have any hurt feelings. So let me give you an example of how this might play out. Let's say an 18-year-old boy, maybe he's even a victim of childhood molestation. He's struggling, his friends are getting married, his reputation's in tatters, he runs away, and he cuts off his side curls, his religious side curls. The community's response would be to say, oh, those poor parents, their heart is breaking. And they will call him selfish for indulging after his own desires, without ever stopping to ask, wait, here's a confused young person who has been hurt, who has been made alone by your shunning, and who is himself, maybe, even if he's being selfish, maybe he's hurting. Why can't you ever consider that despite where he is, he's not just running after his desires, he's also responding to hurt, maybe. But that doesn't come into the equation except when it's contrived and faux empathy. And that's because you harden in a shunning society, you completely harden your heart to the other side. You can only see that they are hurting others without ever understanding where they are coming from. So not only are you ostracized and not offered any kindness and empathy or intolerance, you're also made to feel crazy. I cannot tell you how many times in my youth I doubted my sanity. I would think, how would I know if I'm crazy or not? How would you know if you're not like the other children who are going to special services? Just because I'm not going, maybe they're hiding from me so I am not embarrassed, but I'm really crazy. And actually, now that I partake in these online lockdown skeptic groups, I find a lot of people say, I feel like I'm crazy, and I know exactly where they're coming from. And I also am so glad that I have a little bit of expertise behind me, that I don't let it get to me anymore, because I know the playbook. I know that this is gaslighting. I see the hand that is moving the light, telling me that it is ghosts. I see the process of gaslighting, so I'm not going to buy that I'm the crazy one. But the experience of doubting yourself is very, very fundamental to how those who have questions or who don't fit in are destroyed, essentially. On the other side of this are the conformists, and conformism is rewarded. And not only is conformism rewarded, but those who police other people's conformity, who tell you to make your skirt more modest or to pull up your mask to your nose, those are rewarded twice. And the reward is not petty, it's not small. You get economic, social, emotional, communal status. You get opportunities. You get respect. You feel like a human being. Who wants to be the lonely nut without friends and feeling like everyone is gossiping and not quite sure if you're crazy or not? No one. This is such a powerful effect on humans. If thinking for yourself causes so much personal destruction, then you try not to think about things that can cause trouble. This is how you deal with it. Self-preservation 101. I do it all the time. We all do to some degree. We just shut out things that we know are too large and will create too much trouble in our lives. But if this happens on a communal scale and in every aspect of life, then what you have is a community of people who are thinking about nothing. They're not thinking, which means they're not discussing, which means they're not fleshing out ideas or exposing assumptions to sunlight. Kernels of thoughts in a vacuum are like unfertilized eggs. They just go nowhere. If you are the most brilliant philosopher of all times, if you're the greatest mathematician of all times, if you cannot expose your ideas to the empirical reality and to other ideas, then you are not going anywhere. So contrast the punishing of heathens with a healthy society. In a healthy society, people can say, I'm not so sure about a rushed vaccine, or I don't know about the masks. I think it's let's say I think it's bad for the environment. It ends up in the ocean. In a healthy society, you can say that, and people will say, "Nah, I disagree," or "Yeah, why do you say that?" But in a religious society where there is the sacred that you cannot touch, then you will have people who hold in and are repressed and are looking over their shoulders and are essentially starting to police each other. Then you see clearly that what we have is totalitarianism. And the result is a dumbed-down, stupefied populace. The dumber the populace is, the easier it is for sociopaths to rule them, for the abusers and the opportunists to rear their ugly heads. And never mind the horrible abuse and suffering that is inflicted on those who are trying from an honest place. Maybe they're wrong, maybe they're right, but they are trying to live their lives in their little way. You're suppressing and smothering the human spirit. It's a terrible thing. I don't wear a mask. And I know that almost everyone I talk to about this disagrees with me. I sometimes need to, but if I can help it, I don't wear a mask. And it's fine that people think I'm wrong. I have come to my conclusion, and I understand that other people come to different ones. But what they don't understand is how the way people treat non-mask wearers is distinct from anything else in Western society. I go to the grocery now and I just feel this consistent sense of is someone near me? If they're near me, are they going to say something? And there have been many times where someone had said to me, "You shouldn't be in the store." And I have tried to not engage and to say, okay, try to diffuse and to not let it get to me. And they would say, it says on the door, you shouldn't be in the store. You need to leave. Now this person is a customer. They have a basket. They're shopping. Why do they need to police me? Why do they think they can police me? But that they do that, again, speaks to the idea that this woman or this man who does this thinks that her reality, that she thinks the mask is right, is the only one, and the fact that she thinks I am in the wrong makes me in the wrong. It's not her worldview, it is the worldview. And now she has a right to then go and impose the just solution. It's not her thinking to herself, well, I think this woman is taking a risk that is wrong. And then telling herself, but that's her. Everyone, we all live with people who we think do things wrong and we all sometimes suffer consequences. But rather, the customer thinks to herself, what she does is wrong. And now I have even a moral, dopamine hit in telling her, you are wrong. You should do X, Y, Z. Never mind, I've never told anyone what to wear. Of course, when I'm told that, it's deja vu. I've been told so many times, pull down your skirt and close your button, and what to wear on my body in the religious community. And that I left, and it's come to this. It hurts doubly because it hurts when people are cruel to each other, they're intolerant to each other. This is essentially intolerance, when you think other people don't have a right to their own views. But it's doubly because there's such a strong denial of this. Because I am told so much again and again that this is the opposite of a religion. At least Hasidim cop to it. Now, we don't even have that. I want to tie it together by coming back to the work of Canadian scholar David Cayley. Cayley quotes from the very famous Italian philosopher Giorgio Agamben. And as a side note, Agamben has been a very, very influential name in the lockdown critical community. He has been really vilified by the canceling mob for speaking out very courageously, I would say. And Cayley says of Agamben, what is important in Agamben's argument for me is the claim that we are witnessing the establishment of a new religion and the consolidation of its cult. And the term cult here is used as a more academic term for sort of the religion. So Agamben's solution for this establishment of religion is this. Philosophers must again enter into conflict with religion. And this is something that has happened many times in the course of history. And it is our challenge again now. And Cayley says, by philosophers, we don't mean men in ivory towers. We don't mean people in togas. We don't mean the anointed professional philosopher, but rather the philosopher in each of us, the part in each of us that can ask larger questions, that can live the examined life. And the questions we need to ask as philosophers, so to speak, according to Cayley, is how we come by our ideas, the grounds on which we are governed, and other such elementary matters. In other words, we need to come to see the norms that we have. What do we take for granted as natural that isn't? And we need to start questioning that. This is the only way to stop going down a very dark path of vilifying, oppressing, censorship, punishing, justifying all sorts of draconian restrictions and abuses in the name of this higher cause. The only solution is to become the philosophers, to ask these important foundational questions. And to this I will say, Mr. Cayley, good sir, we shall try. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Very Not Normal podcast. If you would like to support my work, please check out my website, FriedaVizel.com. I have a video tour. I have a Patreon where if you subscribe, you get access to a memoir that's still being published. And please subscribe and share my podcast and all that. Stay risky, and bye-bye now.